Hello and welcome to this Crystallize live stream. My name is Bård and I have with me Sebastian, which is CTO here at Crystallize.
Hello, everyone.
And as you know, the topic of today is around webhooks. And this is kind of, I would say, the main glue that we have when we're talking Crystallize or headless architecture in general, because without it, you kind of are not able to orchestrate. And I think
Yeah, I mean,
I think you had a good example the other day where you had an analogy for kind of the orchestration in Crystallize.
the one with pizzas.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. To me, webhooks are key into an headless architecture, right? Because you want your systems, your architecture, the different services that you have to communicate between each other, right? So you need to make them communicate somehow. And the webhooks are a very good way of doing it. And a webhook, in the end, it's really as simple as ordering a pizza, right? You ask what you want and you get it delivered to your doors somehow, right? So what you want is the payload of something, the pizzas, and the doors is the endpoint. It's your service API, your third-party system. We're going to talk about it, right? Your iPaaS, your ETL, whatever, right?
Yeah, and basically it's the mechanism that allows for event-driven orchestration, async operations, and to me it's kind of I see it as three different buckets of how to work with webhooks. One is if you start at which you also show like a iPaaS, which is integration platform as a service. That's the abbreviation. You have N8N, you have Zapier, which basically means that you can hook things up without doing a single line of code, right? So it's UI point and click. All the way on the other end, you have your own what we call service API. So you manage everything. You have the Lambda endpoints or API endpoints, and you manage queues, retries, all of that good stuff. And then you have something in between, which I haven't worked too much with myself, but Trigger, Ingest are kind of example of
Exactly. Yeah. It's another layer between you doing your own queue system, which might be awesome if you know how to do it, but you have a lot of people who need some help doing this, and those services are quite good. It allows you to have a UI that logs the event. You can retry. You can split your job in different steps. Then you can retry as well. It's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, it kind of means that with like Ingest or Trigger, you don't need to have a hosted middleware basically because it's not correctly, but the way I see it is kind of you have your service API just endpoints, but with some fluff around it, so making everything nice and easy to work with.
No, but this is interesting that you're mentioning this because most of the time people believe kind of this because they provide the UI and they do the orchestration for you. They receive the event, they trigger some code, and it's really easy to forget that the code must run somewhere, and it's not running, at least not for trigger.dev or not yet, and not for ingest. The code is running on your servers, right? So you deploy something somewhere. Yeah. But then everything's abstracted.
Okay, I thought that Trigger actually was running your code. That doesn't really matter. That's not the topic of today. Let's let's get into some stuff. Maybe you can show us a little bit about webhooks, Sebastian. Enough with the talking.
Perfect. Let's do that. So as we mentioned, the webhooks are keys to have some interoperability between system, communication between systems, right? So basically, you want to listen on something. I'm sure you know what is a webhook when we're talking about a payment system. You want to know if the payment has failed, has been captured, authorized, all that stuff. A webhook is a listener. And you listen on something and you want to get something somewhere. You order a pizza, you want to get it at your door. So in Crystallize, well, you probably know already this. You can go to settings, webhooks, and you can start to do things. So here, let's add a webhook. So of course, when you add a webhook, you need to give it a name. Let's do a very simple example, this customer update. So I'm going to name it that way, customer update. And my endpoint, my door for this little demo here would be a website that is famous for this called webhooks.site. It's completely free. You can just go there, you get a URL, and we're going to use that URL as an endpoint. And this is like an echo server. Everything that is endpoint is going to receive will be displayed in this UI. So we're going to be able to debug and see what's going on in our webhook mechanism with Crystallize. Okay, so I'm going to come back on this. So let's go back to the app. Am I lost already? I was there. Arc stuff. Okay, so customer update. We want to do a customer update. So in Crystallize, you have different concepts.
Yeah, exactly. Because here you can select between different things, and it seems like there's 2 levels here with concerns and events.
Exactly. So basically, the concern is, what are we talking about? What do we want to receive information about, right? So a customer update or delete or creation, a product update or a product stock update, something that has been published or unpublished. It could be so many things. A price list that has been created or updated, an order that has been created or updated, and we're going to discuss about that, is the order pipeline, which is really famous for us when we're talking about Crystallize, because, once you've displayed your catalog, you have the checkout process, the buyer made the purchase, then we create an order. But this is really when the job is starting, right? We need to manage the life cycle of the order. So this event is usually very important. So those are the 2 things that are important, the concern and the event. So here, we're going to make a very simple one, customer update. So every time the UI or the API, obviously, everything we do in Crystallize in this UI, it's actually using the API behind the scene, but there's no difference between the UI and the API. So you update a customer using the API, it will trigger the same webhook, right? So customer update, the only thing that I need to do now is to provide my endpoint. So here it's this URL. And then I copy paste this. We can decide if it's which method, HTTP method that we want. For now, it's a simple post. And for the first example, we're going to stay here. We're not going to scroll for now. So I'm going to create this webhook. It's done. There is no invocation. And on my website, everything is empty. So far, so good, Bob?
Yeah, that makes sense. So you didn't, you just said whenever a customer is updated, send data to me to this endpoint.
Yeah. And actually, I did not even mention which data so far.
Exactly.
So for now, we don't even know what we're going to receive. Of course, if you go on the web, if you go on the documentation, you're going to know, right? But we love our documentation, but for the sake of the demo, it's also good to check what's going on, just playing with it.
Yeah.
So let's go to the customer, and we're going to update you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to click on edit and Crystallize Inc. Let's do that, right? So we update you come to work with me when I'm there. And I save. Boom. That's it. Now something, I hope, has happened. So 2 ways of checking this. We can go on the website, webhook.site, and we see that we received something. What did we receive? Well, we received a post request with a payload here. I can make it bigger maybe. That explain what happened. So here it's a customer update. So we have the ID of the customer, the user ID who actually triggered that action, and the tenant ID on which that action has happened.
So this basically means that you get a notification, something happened to this user, go do a request to fetch all the data. That's kind of the situation you're in now. Yeah.
Exactly. So now we receive this from on orders on our service layer, our service API, and we actually probably want to do more, right? Maybe we want to fetch everything regarding this customer to push it into a CRM, right? That would be a very common use case. So you would need to fetch the ID and then do some kind of query back to Crystallize to fetch the data
Kind of like standard
of this customer.
messages. That's how messages are working in general, right?
Exactly.
But
we can do better. Exactly. But so before the but, so this is the first way to see that the webhook has been fired, has been invoked. And you have also a list of invocation on the webhook. So if I go back to my webhook here, I can see that something has happened. We don't save everything. When it's an error, you get a little bit more information. But if everything went okay, you just have a log that your webhook has been fired once.
Small thing that you did there to switch. This is kind of a hidden trick in Crystallize to switch quickly between
Command K.
Command K, yeah. So
Command
you can
K.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just
I'm lazy, that's why.
No, it's a good one.
Kind
But
of
it's
quick.
good to share.
Kind of quick to go there. Yeah, I know. So this is it. But indeed, and at Crystallize, we always want to make it performant. We want to be green as we can, right? To save some bandwidth. But it's more than bandwidth, right? It's just to simplify the life of the developer and to make it a little bit more performant, because you'll see what is going to simplify. Because you can just do what we've done together, but you can go a little bit further. You can actually query the PIM directly from the webhook. So the pizza, instead of being something that you don't know what it is, you actually order really everything that you want on it, all the toppings, right?
So it's not just margarita pizza, it's a custom pizza with your specific topping.
Exactly. So now, actually, I didn't plan to do that, but we will do it anyway. Let's imagine that you receive this. What would you do in the code? You would actually fetch the data from this customer, right? How would you do that in Crystallize? Well, you would go to the PIM API and you would probably do a query to get the information. Information about what? Information about a customer. What kind of customer? You would do this. You would provide the tenant ID because it's required and the identifier of the customer. And then we say, okay, I want the identifier, the first name, and the last name, right? Pretty simple to use Crystallize. I need the tenant ID, so I'm going to get it from here. PIM. And then I do that. And then when I run this, I get more information, right?
Nice.
We updated the company name, so it should be Crystallize.inc. So now let's imagine that I want to receive this at my door. Well, you can just do that. You go back to the webhook, and here you actually build. So you have a set of different queries, but you can provide yours. You can provide yours, but of course you want to make it generic, so you have access to some variable already. If you know GraphQL, you know that you can build a query with variable. And how do you do that? Well, it's in the query. You can do something like get customer details, and you provide some parameter like when you code. So we can say that I want tenant ID, and tenant ID is actually, you need to look at the doc. Customer, I can actually get it from here. The simplest is to actually scroll here, customer, get, and tenant is an ID, identifier is a string. So we're going to say that we need a tenant ID and we need an identifier, and this is a string, and we want to make it required. And then when you've done that, you can actually replace this in your SQL query. And that's it. Of course, you need to provide the parameter. So here in the playground, this is how you do it: tenant ID and identifier. All right. So I need to copy paste this again. Tenant ID.
And of course, what you're showing now, this is GraphQL APIs as standard, right? So this is
exactly
just reiterating on how you can use what we call the PIM API, which is basically the API that runs the app in Crystallize, what we use to power the UI of when you log into Crystallize.
Yep, exactly. So now we have this generic query. I can put it in my webhook because the webhook will inject the variable automatically. So I do this, I save. And then I can go back. Oh, I did reload, sorry about that. Let's go back to the webhook, make sure that that's been saved correctly. Okay, I have the query, I have everything in place. I'm going to go back on the customer and I'm going to edit this customer again. And let's see what's going on. So, oh, see, I just clicked too quickly. Everything has changed now. This is on my address and everything. Save. I go back to this and I did not receive anything. So that's actually good. I know board likes that when something is failing. So let's go to the webhook and let's see what's going on. Here we have an error. Variable identifier required. So I wanted to show an error. Did I do it on purpose or not? You will never know. Let's go back to the webhook. And indeed, here it is not identifier. It is ID like it's mentioned in the doc in here. So I can just do this and the ID of the user will be passed this time. So I can update. We have an error. Nice. I go back to my customer and then we're going to edit again. Let's make it board again. Up.
And of course, now you're kind of doing the full round trip with writing the query from scratch. And
yeah,
of course, there are sample queries directly there also. But it shows that if you're used to or already know the PIM API and Crystallize, you can use it directly in the webhooks, and you have the variables required in order to pull the correct data for that, which actually makes it different from, let's say, a classical message queue, so to speak, where you get a message and you usually just get an ID or something small. Here you can actually send the full payload of, let's say you want to, whenever you get a new customer, you want to add them to mailing list if they've ticked approve, for example. You can send all that data and you don't have to do the round trip.
Exactly. We have a bunch of query. And there is one more actually argument in favor of doing this, because as we mentioned before, if you don't provide a query, you receive the minimum, the bare minimum, which means that your door, right, the endpoint, the service API, must have access to PIM in order to fetch the data. But you may be in a situation where you just want to push the data and you don't want that system to have access to your PIM. So it's actually a way to do that, which in terms of security, is one thing.
And since you did mention security, there are a couple of more things you can do also with webhooks. I've seen headers. There's something called signature.
Yep, exactly. So let's go back here. So for some use case, I'm going to leave this one. You may want to add custom header. So here, to be honest, actually, I didn't think about a good use case, but you can create, and maybe your endpoint or your service API requires something here. Maybe you need to provide some value on which you want to rely on your endpoint. So here,
could be if you have a generic, it could be as simple as if you have a generic thing, you have to provide the tenant identifier or something like that.
Yeah, it could be tenant identifier, yeah, or maybe Crystallize, webhook version. Depending on how you handle the data, you may want to version this for any kind of reason. Let's do this example. So when I do that now, and I come back, and I did, you're gonna see that this header is obviously passed to the webhook, right? So it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Did I made a mistake again? Is it? Oh no. Okay. 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 So here you can see that you have the header, Crystallize Webhook 1.0. So this is a way for you.
And these are, of course, static headers, right? Because you set them once and variables, basically.
Exactly. But in the world of webhook, you have a security concern here because you have an endpoint, you receive data to your endpoint, you know, someone knock at your door and deliver to you a pizza. Maybe you want to be sure that this pizza is coming from someone safe, because you know, food poisoning is not that cool. So you want exactly the same logic here for webhooks. So Crystallize provides something called signature. And am I going, I don't know if I can copy paste this, but a signature is just a GWT token that you can check. We have a documentation for that, of course, so you can go there and look at how to verify the signature. Of course, if you are using Node in the GS API client, you have a simplification of that. You can just provide the key, because I'm going to show you there is a key somewhere, of course, to verify the signature. But you know, we can already copy paste this token into GWT token, and you can see what it is about. So it's Crystallize giving you user ID, tenant identifier, and a hash MAC. So this is signed. So in Crystallize, you will be able to verify the signature, because if you go to settings here in your tenant, you get the signature secret. So this is how you sign, you verify that the signature, the signature is valid, but it's not enough. You must be sure that the content of the payload has not been tampered, right? You must be sure of that. So there is an hash MAC as well in here, which is basically an hash of the content of the payload. So yeah, that's
basically verified,
right?
But it's important to mention because it's quick to just create an endpoint and just get the data, and then somebody else can just send that data. And if you don't do any checks, you have a big security hole. When we're talking e-commerce, if it's clearing a cache for a front end, but if you're talking customer information and placing orders and things like this, you do want to have control over that.
Definitely.
That's cool. This is all good. I have learned something from you that even though we're making cloud services, we do need to be able to work locally. But Crystallize is a cloud service, and webhooks are kind of fired on the internet, and my local host doesn't have that. How would you work with, when you start, you want to write your endpoint, you want to
exactly, because this is cool, but this is not completely integrated into your developer experience. If you are a developer and you want to work on a project and have everything wired, because you could definitely use this, but what would you do? So you would go there, you will receive the payload, and then you will probably use a tool close to like a Postman, where you actually copy paste this to actually call your endpoint, and everything will work. Well, not everything, because you need to be quick, because the signature is only valid for 30 seconds. So you have to do that within the 30 seconds, which is quite hard sometimes. So you have other tools. We are going to talk about ngrok, but you have others. We just wanted to demo how simple it was also to do that, right? So to do that, I'm going to do that with you from scratch. I need an HTTP server. So the simplest way to run an HTTP server is to do this, right? We're going to take a TCP port like 2345. Okay, but this is opening an HTTP server on my computer, right? That is doing nothing. This is not what I want to demo. I want to demo ngrok, but ngrok needs to have a valid HTTP port, right? So I'm going to do ngrok HTTP on 2345. And then the magic of ngrok is working. What is it doing for me? It creates a remote URL somewhere, and it does the proxy to my computer. So now, instead of using this URL in the webhook, the webhook.site, I can just switch this, and I will receive the payload. So I just have to do that, and let's do whatever here, live stream. I'm going to show you why. And that's it. I do that, save, we go back to the do this, we edit this, we save. So now here we're going to see two things. First, we see a call to something like /livestream. I didn't do it. Crystallize did it.
Yep.
And here we also see something here. Of course, it's a not found. But what we wanted to show here is actually ngrok comes with the web interface that is really, really nice. Because every time you will receive a request from Crystallize, you have a UI. You have a UI on which you can do stuff. And let's say you want to replay it, you can replay it, and your local computer will receive it. So you can play, you can tweak the header. Well, you do you, but it's very convenient to work with this.
And basically now you're hooking the webhook to your local environment. And this would be, I mean, now you have a web server that doesn't do anything, could be an XJS project, and it's the API route you send it to, right? And then you code and replay onto the code works, and then you work on the signature when everything works and verify that. So this is really a key point in working with webhooks, because you do need to work with this locally, and this is how you can connect the dots there. So I've always been a fan of ngrok. It's a super useful tool.
Yep, definitely.
So that's kind of a top tip in terms of local development. I could show something even simpler, if that makes sense. So I can steal the screen here.
Yeah, go for it.
Because now you've shown let's say what you do as a proper developer when you want to develop everything locally. You talk about security, how you can query to get your good payload, etc. But in the beginning, we talked about iPaaS services, and there's plenty out there. Like N8N is an example. Zapier is another. I just want to show the simplest possible way here. So here I have set up Zapier, and Zapier is basically catching events, transforming them, and passing them on. No code. So what I first did was, and this is a different concern in Crystallize, we have something called flows, which is basically workflows for managing any type of content operation, creating, translating product information, things like this. Automatic translation, for example. But one of the things that is, at least we use a lot, whenever things change in Crystallize, we like to get a Slack message. Just get a message, Sebastian did something, I can go in and check. So what we did here was basically create a webhook, which goes directly to Zapier. But this listens to a different concern, product, and added to flow. And here we created a query. No need to really go into the details of the query here, but basically we're fetching who did what to what type of content here. And basically what we're interested in here is, I'll show the result first, because here we have the flows in Crystallize. And if I move a product or two, we have said that we will fire off a webhook. And we're firing off into a Slack channel. So if I just do like this, just to show, so I move this to approved. And then you basically get a SAP, async, boom. And it's a simple message saying that I just moved Monstera in language English to stage approved in QA flow. Go here to manage them. So that's kind of a very, very simple example, but I didn't write a single line of code because this query, I just used a sample query here.
Yeah.
So basically, I went into Zapier and created it's a two-step SAP, as they call it. So here we have catching a hook from Crystallize, which basically gives you gives you the endpoint where to send it, and you can also work with the actual the actual endpoint, and also do kind of like Sebastian did in with Ngrok, where you will be able to update here if you change the query, for example, you get new data in the query, and here it gives you the actual data that is available in this payload. So very, very similar. And in the Slack SAP, which is the naming here, you basically have well, you have to link your account, click approve, and here you choose the channel.
You map the data, right?
Yeah. And it's basically just mapping. So it's just I want to have this data, and I want to have this data here. So it's really that simple to use these kind of tools, and it's kind of on the totally other spectrum than what Sebastian showed with doing everything yourself. And as we did talk about with, for example, trigger.dev or ingest, you kind of have something in between here, all giving you the same kind of capabilities, I would say, but you in terms of what fits your project. Are you just going to send a Slack message, or I don't know, an order confirmation email? You can just trigger it with Zapier, for example. Of course, you can also just write the code in JavaScript if you want that.
And you have other tools like Workato, Make, even MuleSoft, I think, would be used to do that, right? It's kind of a big thing, but why not? Any ETL kind of, it's mapping data. So
yeah. Well, wasn't it called Enterprise Service Bus? Isn't that? I'm not sure if they MuleSoft used the. I was called iPaaS. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's mapping data, exactly. So those are a couple of examples, but if we want to look at, let's take a couple of scenarios. What can we use this for, right? And I switched here to what we call fulfillment pipelines in Crystallize. So, and this is probably the first place you would use Webhooks when you're working with Crystallize. This is kind of the main, this is core to e-commerce, where we basically have different events, and we have here, let's say, on the order itself. So it's a demo product, demo SKU order that is being placed here. And with Crystallize, we call it capture and orchestrate, because the first thing we do is we capture the order at scale. I mean, we benchmark with 1 million orders throughput per hour. But that's just when it starts, right? Because it could be an order that is triggered from a subscription renewal, for example. And you first start with putting it into processing, for example. You have them
charge clients to get the money, right?
Capture, yeah.
And then,
and this is I think it's a good example. This is a pattern from Sebastian. I didn't come up with this, but I like it's a very, very simple pattern to manage subscription renewals, because you have an initial state, and that would kind of push it to capture. Could be directly to capture, could be. And then the capture will basically be a lambda that checks, can I charge the credit card, for example? Stripe call. And then if it's failed, it could jump directly to the failed workflow. Or if it's succeeding, it could jump to success. Now, why do you want this? Basically, you could have, for example, if you work with Trigger, you can have a webhook that will retry in, let's say, 1 day, 3 days, and try to recharge it. Or you can even manually drag and drop it into capture, and it will try the capture here. So it could both work with automated retry processes, but also just manual. This is actually what we use ourselves with our own subscription service. So I think this is a good example of how you can orchestrate with, in this case, what we call pipelines, fulfillment pipelines, and webhooks, and that kind of you hook the magic code into events, and you have full control.
Yeah, and without webhooks, those kind of automations are not possible, right? We can go even further, right? You could receive a Slack notification that the payment has failed, and then it could be another coworker calling the client, the credit card is obsolete or whatever, I deprecate, expired. And then you click on the button in Slack, and then you trigger whatever you want to trigger. And so definitely. Also, another example of webhooks is you want to expire the cache if you are building the front end.
This is on the other spectrum, right? Because, and I think this is also differentiates. We've been in this space for quite some time, Sebastian, and many times if you're receiving data from a system, sometimes you have a delta that you can fetch all changes since, but more often than not, you actually have to fetch all the data. That's typical. But with an event-driven system like Crystallize, we can tell you when something has changed. And when you're talking about web performance, as you said, you typically work with some sort of caching strategy. If it's using Fastly, CDN, or something built in or whatever, doesn't really matter. But you want to keep the cache hit ratio as high as possible. And this is what we also implement in the boilerplate, right? With the remix, where we basically then listen to webhooks from Crystallize and update the cache. We also did a blog post on this, where you can basically have a very, very high cache hit ratio by using the events from Crystallize. So that's more related to web performance, but it's an important part of the stack, right?
It is, and it's probably bad. Yeah, definitely. It's another subject, right? But some people would just rebuild the full application, which might work when you have a blog post. I mean, just a blog with few pages. But when you're talking about e-commerce and millions of, let's say, hundreds of thousands of SKUs, you don't want to rebuild the full website all the time. So you have to fine tune what you clean or what you reload or what you rebuild.
And I think this is an important point, especially when we're talking about modern JavaScript frameworks, Next.js and the likes, which is actually designed to rebuild everything from scratch. In the last year or so, you also get more fine-grained control there,
exactly.
to be able to purge and update, because you don't want to, like the default in Next.js is to rebuild a page whenever you get a visit. And the page might rebuild 8 other pages that are linked up. So you might have, nine API calls generated from a read, which makes no sense, right? You could rather purge that or update that whenever the content changes. So a lot less traffic downstream, and you get a fast experience. So that's a very good pattern to keep in mind when you're building large and performance storefronts.
Yep.
Good. And of course, there's many other cases like pushing to CRM, as you mentioned, pushing orders to ERP, to warehousing, capturing payments, and kind of having the collection process for different types of payments, etc. But in essence, it's about what we've been talking about today. It's you can orchestrate, and you can do it based on events. You can do it async. You can push it to queues. You can handle performance. And it's kind of simple to work with, from point and click down to, I'm not going to say the proper way, but the proper way that Sebastian showed with local development, and you have control over everything.
Yeah, which it's definitely not the proper way, right? It really depends on the use case.
Yeah, it's one of the proper ways.
Exactly.
I think we're through in terms of the topics we wanted to talk about today. give it a go. The simplest is to start with like a Crystallize and Webhook.site. Then you can play with it and debug and play with some queries, see what type of events you can listen to, etc. And then you get started with Webhooks and orchestration with Crystallize. So with that, thanks for watching.
Yeah. If you have any question, we have the Slack community. Don't hesitate to join.
Join the Slack community, and also if you want to subscribe, please do. We are doing different live stream series at the moment, so you will get a notification whenever we launch something new if you subscribe, as you know. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.